Diane Sayre for U.S. Senate.
Hi, thanks. I trust everyone can hear me. Can you hear me? Okay, good. So we have an enormous job to do, and it's not about an election. How many people here are familiar with the story of Plato's cave? Okay, so you remember, just a refresher, everybody's stuck in this cave and their heads are riveted facing one direction, and there's light from behind, and behind them is a road with people walking on it. But everyone in the cave just sees these shadows going through each other. And they have a very peculiar idea about the world, because what they're looking at are flat shadows with no form, no expression. I imagine, I don't think he specifies, but I don't think they're able to really, they don't talk to each other too much. They're just there watching this odd display. So somebody gets out of the cave, goes out, is blinded. The first thing is they're blinded by the sunlight. And then they see that the world is not a bunch of black, flat things passing through each other, but there are many shapes. They actually can't pass through each other. You have to walk around someone if you're about to run into them, or you can bump into them, but you're not going to go through them, certainly. And that person comes back to try to explain to the people who never witnessed reality what the real world is. And we are in that moment. And so my campaign is not about spectators. I don't need people to cheer for me. We don't need, that is not going to do it. Because what you have is an entirely new paradigm coming into existence, where billions of people have picked up the attitude like the black population in Montgomery, Alabama, when they decided they were not going to get on segregated buses anymore. And they didn't care if it meant they were walking through snow and ice and sludge, and they did that for an entire year. The Montgomery bus boycott went on for a year, over a year. And even though Montgomery is not like Buffalo, where I was recently visiting, it can be pretty miserable in the winter. They do get a little snow. And what the city of Montgomery did is they made everything illegal. So the first thing that happened was the black taxi drivers said, well, we'll lower our rates so you don't have to take the bus. You can take a taxi and you can get to work. And before too long, the city council made that illegal. And then what they said, and I actually had a dear friend down there, his name was John King. He worked for the U.S. Postal Service, because the postal workers knew every street like the back of their hand. So the black postal workers got together and mapped out carpool routes. So they were carpooling along, but then pretty soon the city council caught on to that and they made that illegal. And it was one roadblock after the next, one hardship after the next. Then the white women, the Southern Belles, discovered that they could not get their day done without their help. So the white women began picking up their help and driving them around and helping to keep things moving. And it was very difficult. There were very difficult incidents and scenes along the way with attempts to really provoke people to respond violently. But Martin Luther King was very committed that no one could succumb to violence and no one could lose their temper. Because the point about losing your temper, the point about rage, has anyone in this room ever been enraged? blind rage. Why do they say that? Because when you're enraged, you do not think straight. And whenever you're thinking of doing harm to another human being, you are not thinking straight. So that is why Martin Luther King had to work with people, and they had to do exercises, and they had to do drills to practice never losing their temper, never succumbing to that mindset known as rage, because you wouldn't be able to think straight. And you can just think of an example. Supposing that my friend Madeline here in the front did something horrible that I didn't like, and I came to this meeting. Well, she's probably not affected by it, but my mind is like, oh, right? And nothing comes out right. And then someone asks an innocent question, and I say, are you kidding me, right? That's never happened to anyone here, probably, besides me. But, so the point is, this was a whole group of people in a whole city who went through over a year and got themselves completely as under control in a dignified way and would not react to anything thrown at them, including horrible things. So what happens? The Supreme Court ruled that it is against the Constitution to segregate the buses. But it was going to take 2 weeks for the official word of the court victory to reach the people of Montgomery. And that meant the city had no intention of complying. They were not going to comply just because the Supreme Court said so. If anyone's been in the South, we used to organize down there for Lyndon LaRouche, and the police would come to your literature table and we'd say, we have the right to be here. It's the First Amendment, the Constitution. They say, Constitution? It's like a little different, bit of a different place sometimes in some parts of the South. So at any rate, the city had no intention of complying until the ruling made it through the official channels to reach the city of Montgomery, which they estimated would take about 2 weeks. So Martin Luther King, and meanwhile the city council has now made their last, whatever arrangement they made has been made illegal. So they're gonna have 2 weeks of total hardship to get to work, to get where they're going. And they decided to pull everyone together, and it took a couple of churches to hold all the people to say, are we gonna get on the buses, knowing that we've won, even though we'll have to endure segregation for 2 weeks. And King wanted to ask them because he knew people were having a hard time. They were losing their jobs. They were getting to work late. It was a hardship. Or are we going to wait? And of course, I think you know what everyone did. They said, no, we are not getting on those buses. We are not getting on those buses until we are treated as the full citizens that we are. And at that church service, and the movement was integrated. So I guess King was at one church, there was another, a white Lutheran minister from Massachusetts down there, and he gave a sermon, which at one part came from 1 Corinthians 13. When I was a child, I spake as a child, I glow as a child, but when I became a man, I put away childish things. And when he got to that part of the sermon, the entire crowd just erupted. Because everyone knew that through this year, they had become different, and they were never going back. And what has happened as a result of the foolishness of the Biden administration, British intelligence, NATO, the billionaires, the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, is that billions of people on the planet have come to the conclusion that they are going to take their birthright and they are never going to be colonized again. And they are never going backwards. And when you see some of the speeches of these leaders from Africa at the BRICS, or you see that President Putin calls a Russian-African summit in St. Petersburg, and Victoria Nuland hops on her broomstick and flies all over Africa, and Tony Blinken threatening people, don't show up, don't show up. Every nation was represented. Some of them ducked. They didn't send their head of state, but 17 African heads of state still went to the Russian-African Forum. And then you had this week the BRICS meeting, which was the 5 BRICS plus 40 other nations. Emmanuel Macron of France tried to get in, and they said no. And they admitted 6 more nations to the BRICS, and you know it's going to have people like Kirsten Gillibrand tearing their hair out because Kirsten Gillibrand she was the prime sponsor of a bill called the Restrict Act, which was so fascist that it couldn't even get introduced in a committee of this rotten Congress. And basically it says that you cannot do anything or use any technology that might give a hostile foreign power access to the U.S. or spread a narrative like we might not have fair elections in this country. I don't know if anyone noticed. So this act names a number of nations: China, Russia, Iran, Venezuela, Cuba, North Korea, that if you do anything that could possibly benefit these nations over the United States, you can face up to 20 years in prison and a $250,000 fine. And the last section of the act says the Freedom of Information Act does not apply. So if you get arrested for this, you don't even get to find out what they're charging you with. Now, that act was so egregious, it died in committee. But what is the mentality of a U.S. senator who would introduce something like that? And now, when I tell you the nations which have officially joined the BRICS and will have full membership by the time we get to October, the next conference is in Russia, is Ethiopia, Egypt, Iran, Saudi Arabia, Argentina, who am I forgetting? UAE, United Arab Emirates, okay? So this is huge. Now, how many people in the United States do you think are aware of this? What? Too many, yeah.
5%?
No, I'm kidding.
5%?
What?
5%?
5%, yeah, maybe less. So what happens when you talk to an American? If you're on the street organizing an American, they say, you know, I am so oppressed. You say, well, you know about Agenda 30 by 30 or whatever. They want to shut down food and yeah, you know what? They're also doing this, and you know what? They're doing this, and you know what? They're doing this. And so you try and have a conversation with an American, and it turns into a competition of who can give the longer laundry list of all the horrible things that are being done to you. Now, what is the difference between that mindset and the mindset of the people in Montgomery, Alabama at the end of the 1 year? Or the mindset of the people in Africa right now? Even though people that I have had on my symposium are sitting there often in the dark because they don't have electricity, they don't feel oppressed because they say 20 years from now, our continent is going to be totally different because we are not going along with this anymore. And the change is, in a sense, of identity, which became possible because of what China and Russia did. Because Biden and his controllers are in violation of natural law. Natural law is that human beings are unique, that we are distinguished from the animals, that we are each equal, that we are in the image, you can say, of the Creator because we can each be creative. There is no other living creature that can wake up in the morning and say, you know what, this is really a problem, tomorrow I'm going to do that differently. Beavers, I love beavers, they make cute little houses. They've been making these cute little houses for thousands of years and they haven't really improved them. And the same with, there are animals that do interesting things. They haven't changed what they do. Human beings have free will and we can change what we do and we can think about the future. And we can resolve that even after we are dead, we can have in our imagination a future that is better than what we are living. And it gives us pleasure to know that a child born 500 years from now will have a prosperous life, will be fluent in 6 languages, will be a brilliant clarinetist or whatever, because of what we did. And that's human. And that means, as Friedrich Schiller said, there's a limit to a tyrant's power, that you cannot suppress people forever. You cannot crush them forever. They will not tolerate it. But the question is, when you get to that breaking point, is the eruption of rage, is it like the French Revolution where everyone says, I have to get revenge, I have to get back at that person, whatever they did to me? Or is it like the American Revolution, or what Xi Jinping has declared with the Belt and Road? Is it a new conception of creating a government which upholds and defends the principle that every single human being has this talent to give to the world? So what is happening in the world is that a rotten, old, colonial legacy and outlook is done. It is over. They are not going to put 7 billion people back into slavery. The only way that you could stop what is happening right now is with a nuclear war or a biochemical war or something totally, totally catastrophic. That's where the danger comes from. Because if these people keep insisting, we're going to stop you, we're going to stop China, we're going to stop Russia, then we're over the abyss, we're done. So in a sense, we have kind of a race against time, because while Americans are ducking and covering and, whining and complaining about all the horrible things that are going on, and they are horrible. I'm not saying it's not horrible. I'm not saying that what happened to the people in Maui who lost everything and they get $700 from the Biden administration. I mean, you can buy a house for $700, right? I don't know what you're complaining about, right? That, I'm not saying that's not horrible, it is. But what I'm saying is the world doesn't work that way anymore, and the world is rejecting this. And that the people of the United States have to, in effect, get with the spirit that has taken the rest of the world, because then we will not allow what is going on in this country and what we are doing to others. And that's the challenge, is can we get into the minds of all these people who are sitting there in Plato's cave looking at these shadows, can we somehow get a spark into the minds of these people that says, we don't have to live like this. We don't have to put up with this. Egypt is building 15 new cities. They're building the largest nuclear power complex in the world with 8 reactors, together with Russia. No one here even knows that. When's the last time the U.S. built a new city? I'm afraid it might be Las Vegas. That's great, right? That's a great city.
West Virginia.
What, West Virginia, right? I met a child at the fair who was really a very interesting young man. And his mother said that's what he does all day. He designs cities. He's about 7 years old. And he's thinking about, what new cities should look like. And he and his younger brother have planned a city on Mars. And they have an idea of what it's going to work like. That's what all children should be doing. And as they learn science, they learn physics, they learn biology, then they figure out what would be required to do that. So this is where we are. This is why the establishment is terrified. They did such a number on Lyndon LaRouche. Here we are 4 years after LaRouche died, and you still can't say his name, right? You say LaRouche, and it's like, hitting a third rail in some circles, is because these ideas, because what he did with physical economy is he demonstrated that it's knowable and that you can design an economic system which you can measure in terms of population growth, energy flux density. You have an actual empirical measure of the success of your economy. And it's in human terms, not in monetary terms. So I'm saying this not to say it's not dangerous. It is very dangerous. We are perhaps this close to a nuclear war. But the reason why it's dangerous is because we are at the change of an epoch. And a rotten old system against which we fought the American Revolution is dead and finished. And the nation which led the way, as Daniel said, which had the first successful anti-colonial resolution, has somehow, through a series of coups and assassinations in our own country in the 60s, we have now morphed into the British Empire. We are doing everything that's listed in our Declaration of Independence that we had the revolution against. But it doesn't mean that this identity is not in the American people. So that's what we have to wake up. That's what I hope that you would help me to do. This is the message we have to get across to everybody, everywhere, and we just have to figure out how to, in a sense, catch people on fire in a good way, not a bad way, a good way, so that they cannot suppress the reality of what's happening anymore in the United States. And if we do that, not only will we survive, but we will have an extraordinary future. And if we don't do that, then we might all be dead.
Sure.
So that's where we are.